Hi, welcome back to Bike Speeds. Today you join me on the lovely Bianchi Sprint abandoned project. We serviced this on the channel last week, and today we thought we'd give you a ride and talk you through the bike and also tell you how I actually had an accident on this bike the first time I took it out, which actually stopped me filming the first time round. So this is a second attempt, but we'll tell you about that as we go. So I've rid this a little way. I can see why Bianchi have such a great reputation for build quality. Straight out the box after the service and bringing it back to life, everything on it is so taut and tight. It's very, very nice to ride. Classic bikes really do still have their place in cycling. If you just want to take a day where you're not chasing the clock, chasing segments or doing your normal training, to take a classic 70s, 80s, 90s bike out for a ride can really bring back to you why you cycle. They are a real joy of engineering and mechanical ability. Absolutely fantastic to ride. You've got a much more tactile feel on the shifters. In the instance of this bike, it has the friction fit shifters on the down tube, so I think it's done by feel. You feel the gears in as you're changing gear, you feather them in, you trim them yourself. With modern shifters on the handlebars, you click away, you change gears up and down. With these kind of bikes, you kind of pick your gear. So I'm now coming up to a hill, dropped it down a gear, and that's kind of where I'll sit, because you want your hands on the handlebars to climb. And you can't change gear now on the shifters like modern group sets. It's always a bit unnerving when you first take a bike out like this where you've retensioned the wheels, because they have a tendency to click as the spokes settle in, and this bike did that when I first took it out on the first mile or so to get into here. But once it settles, everything's quiet. The paint on this bike is a triumph. It really is glossy. It's got a beautiful finish on it. It really came up nicely. And that is something with these older bikes. You can actually see the love of even things like the paint being put on the frame. Handlebars on this bike are quite narrow. Very narrow, in fact, for this era. But for me, I'm quite narrow in the shoulder, so the handlebars are the perfect size for me. I didn't measure them, but these have got to be around 380 to 400, I would have thought, feeling the way they feel. White handlebar tape is always a tricky choice on a bike like this. I tend to favour always wearing gloves on them to try and keep that nice and clean, especially if it's not your everyday bike. I think with these, when you've got these shifters on the down tubes like this, you kind of gradually get a feel for where you need to set them, and they are actually quite easy to index once you get going. This bike's got a lot of components on it that wouldn't have been original on the bike, but they work well with it. They are within period. And the tyres on this one are good. Everything's rolling smoothly, nice and quiet. Very, very pleasing restoration this. We don't actually ride customers' bikes, or I try not to ride customers' bikes when I service them, because of what I'm about to tell you with the accident I had. But most things can be done in the stand. I generally only ever ride a customer bike if I'm diagnosing something. So if there's a noise that I need to diagnose or an issue with that bike, I will ride it, but I'll never take it out on a ride like this. This bike actually belongs to ourselves. We purchased this one for the channel to do a restoration on, so we're quite happy to ride this bike. and it is a joy Going downhill now on a little slightly twisty segment. It's very, very nice. So on Sunday I went to take this bike out. What I tend to do is ride away from the town I live to pick up one of these quieter back roads, and I left the shop, come around the corner, and walking up the road, this is in a housing estate, in the centre of the road here was a man with his wife on the left, and he was just walking in a straight line up the middle of the road. So I clocked him, I saw him, and pulled into the left, and he started to veer left towards me in his walking pattern. So I hugged in left, and at the moment I got to him, this is all happens in a split second as we know with these things, the moment I got to him, he stepped across without looking to go onto the pavement on the other side of the road. Now he'd walked 4 or 5 car lengths in the middle of the road, so I thought that was his pattern, and he stepped across and he hit me whilst riding this bike. Thankfully I wobbled, hit him, didn't fall off, caught the bike, but the GoPro and the stick on the back also collided. GoPro came off the stick, broke the mount, hit the floor, shattered the screen, and so it goes on. And that was the end of the ride. Thankfully neither he or I were hurt in any way. It was just one of those things. It was a light impact. It was literally on the first few feet of the ride, and that was that. So we had to reset up the GoPro, get a new mount before we could come out with you today. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you're riding. But I did have a crash which sort of ended my competitive riding, where I broke my shoulder, and I've always been very nervous of falling off a bike again because I know that's very, very weak. Following that, it never really healed properly, and that's a story for another day. But when I hit him, that moment in my mind was like, oh my god, don't fall off. So it's quite amusing really in many ways, but also pretty unnerving in others. But the bike was okay, no damage to the bike, and we live to fight another day. So today is that day. Well, I'm going to find somewhere to stop and just talk you through this bike in a moment, if I can find somewhere. Simon is actually looking after the shop for me to get out on this ride. We're actually at about 8:15 now, so he'll look after the shop until I get back. And then actually he's off today to get hold of another bike for us for the channel, which he's travelling some distance for. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. Right, I think we'll stop here and talk through the bike. So this is a mid-80s Bianchi Sprint. You can see the beautiful maroon paint there with the white livery. It's quite easy to replicate these bikes, but there's a couple of ways you can really tell when these are original frames. One is Bianchis of this era have the frame number stamped on the headstock rather than the bottom bracket as on other bikes. And also, of course, you have Italian thread bottom bracket threads. That's the telltale really to know that it's an Italian bike. And obviously with the frame number on the front there, we know it's a genuine Bianchi frame. This is sitting on non-original wheels. These have been replaced at some point, but they work very well with this bike. And it's nice to see the details with the white walls on the tyres there. It just brings this livery and the whiteness out of the bike. Then obviously, as you saw in the video, we restored all the components. So we've got new brake blocks here, new cables, new handlebar tape, new bearings. All of that's been done. Wheel bearings, bottom bracket bearings, rear wheel bearings, rear hub. We actually, you saw on the video, we had a 7-speed Shimano hub on there. We actually found this hub after filming finished, which is more in keeping with the era of the bike. So we popped that on there, and that now really sits very, very nicely, along with our super slick cables. And obviously we've also got the new brake blocks. I've done the wheel bearings in the pedal, I've done the pedal bearings in the pedals. So it really is sitting pretty now. We replaced the saddle. This was actually identical to the saddle that was on the bike when we got it. Just the difference in the colouring slightly on the reds and the blacks, but the identical saddle just in a slightly different colouring. So it works really well with this bike, and you can see it's a thing of beauty, and the pleasure on getting out riding this today is really immense. It's a lovely bike. So we'll take this for a little spin back, and yeah, I'm very pleased with the way this one came up. So as we head back to the shop, I think in summary, bikes of this nature are absolutely fantastic. They're great for winter training as well. If you can find one that maybe isn't quite as nice and sentimental as maybe this one would be, there's plenty of 80s road bikes out there. Steel frames, they're absolutely bulletproof. Mechanically, they will actually wear an awful lot better than a modern bike, because a lot of the components like the chain sets and things are steel. They're not aluminium, so they don't wear quite so quickly. They'll take chain stretch a little bit better. So we're actually at commuter hour here now, so there's quite a few cars going past. So I think that's a good spot for me to focus on my riding as I come back into town. Enjoy these last few miles back. And we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.